The gas station was quiet, except for the soft hum of morning traffic and the faint rustle of wind against the flag. An old Chevy idled near pump number 4. He stood beside it, one leg missing, a cane tucked under his arm, hands steady as they reached for the fuel nozzle. From behind the glass, a clerk barely out of his teens chuckled and muttered, "Bet he forgets which side the tank's on." She heard it from the passenger seat. And she saw it, the way her husband didn't flinch. Didn't turn. Didn't speak. Who was this man who chose silence over pride? Why did that hurt more than shouting back ever could? The boy behind the counter had no idea what he'd just done. But she knew. She always knew. Not every hero has a statue. Some just need to be remembered once, quietly. If that means something to you, you're in the right place. Subscribe to American Quiet Courage. The sun hadn't yet burned through the mist when he finally began pumping the gas. His hands moved slowly, not from age, but from years of learning not to rush. She stayed in the car, watching his back, her own fingers curled tightly in her lap. He didn't look at her. He never did in moments like this. But she knew he was holding it in again. He always did. And all she could do was sit there and let him. The pump clicked softly as John steadied himself beside the old Chevy. His left hand gripped the nozzle. His right clutched the edge of the doorframe, not from pain, but balance. The kind of balance only a man with one leg and too many memories learns to master. The morning light caught the faded patch on his cap, SEAL Team 2. Dust dulled the navy blue, but the stitching held strong. Inside the car, Eleanor watched quietly, her hands resting in her lap. Her wedding ring had long since slid too loose on her thin finger, so now it looped onto a thin gold chain around her neck. It clinked gently against his. 2 rings, side by side, over a blouse she'd ironed herself that morning. She never left the house without it. Not since his stroke, not since the VA visits began. He looked over his shoulder just once, making sure she was still there. She nodded, just enough. That was their rhythm. No words. Just knowing. A soft rattle came from the glove box. Her hands moved instinctively to steady the small bottle inside. Blood pressure pills. He'd missed one yesterday. She didn't remind him. She never did when he was already carrying too much. Behind them, another car pulled into the station. A young couple, music too loud, laughter spilling out. Eleanor turned her face toward the window. Not in disapproval, just distance. The kind of distance time carves when the world moves on, and you don't. John's hand slipped slightly on the pump. She saw it from the corner of her eye. Still, he kept standing. Still, he kept going. And she kept watching, quietly. The way she always had. The pump ticked softly as gas flowed into the tank. John leaned slightly against the car, shifting his weight just enough to ease the pressure on his remaining leg. His face didn't show pain, just the effort it took to hide it. Eleanor turned her head, gazing past the windshield toward the convenience store's wide glass windows. Inside, 3 people stood near the counter. One of them, a man about 40 in a suit and tie, looked up and made eye contact. Not long. Just long enough to register something between surprise and discomfort. He quickly looked back at his phone. A young woman in scrubs paused by the coffee station, watching through the window. She didn't smile. Just stared. Eleanor noticed the moment her eyes shifted, not to John's face, but to his leg. Then down. Then away. It wasn't hate. It wasn't even cruelty. It was that kind of look people give when they don't know what to say, so they say nothing. But the silence speaks anyway. John didn't see any of it. Or maybe he did and just didn't let on. But Eleanor saw it all. She glanced over at him. He hadn't moved. Still holding the pump with steady hands, still watching the numbers rise like it was the only thing in the world that needed watching. Then came the sound of a horn, sharp, 2 quick taps. A pickup truck behind them. Young guy at the wheel. No expression, just impatience. John stepped back, giving the driver more room, without looking up. And Eleanor's hand slowly reached for the door handle. Not to get out, just to hold it. Her husband didn't need defending. Not with words. But still, her grip tightened. She saw the eyes. And they stayed with her. The pump next to theirs was open. No line, no weight. But the yellow tag hung from the handle, fluttering slightly in the breeze, out of order. A younger man might have tried it anyway. John didn't. He saw the sign, gave it a brief glance, then turned his focus back to the car in front of him. Still filling. Still not done. He could have asked to cut in. Could have said, "I'm not gonna take long." But he didn't. He chose to wait. One step back. A shift of the cane. A long, slow breath. From the passenger seat, Eleanor followed his every move. Not because she doubted him, but because she still felt every ache his body carried. She knew how much it cost him to stand still, not lean, not rest. She saw the tremble in his right forearm as he kept himself upright. But she didn't move. She didn't roll down the window. Didn't call out, "Just sit for a minute, John." She wanted to. God knows, she wanted to. But this was his moment to claim on his terms. So she chose to let him. The driver at the next pump finally climbed back into his SUV. Music thumped from inside, too loud for the quiet of the morning. John didn't flinch. Just stepped forward once the spot cleared, like he'd been invited. And as he reached for the pump again, Eleanor let her eyes fall closed. Not out of weariness, but reverence. This wasn't about gas. This was about dignity. And some things take longer to reclaim than others. A low rumble echoed from the far end of the road, too smooth for an old truck, too deep for a family car. Eleanor opened her eyes. John was still standing, steady now, his back to the approaching sound. The fog had started to lift, just slightly, enough to blur the outline of the dark SUV that turned into the station. Then another behind it. Both moved slowly, deliberately, engines idling low, windows tinted. No logos. No plates. Just presence. Eleanor's breath caught, not from fear, but from a kind of still recognition. She didn't say anything. Neither did John. The vehicles rolled past the pump islands without hesitation, stopping just across from the Chevy. Doors opened with soft, weighted clicks. 4 men stepped out, quiet, clean, purposeful. No dress uniforms, no salutes. Just black shirts, khaki pants, boots meant for action, not display. The tallest among them walked with a kind of certainty that didn't demand attention, it simply received it. He looked at John for a long second. Not scanning. Not questioning. Just looking, like a man who already knew what he'd come for. John didn't blink. He didn't step back. He didn't speak. Eleanor remained still in the car, one hand resting gently on her necklace, her fingers brushing the two rings as if steadying time itself. No one else at the station seemed to notice. The clerk inside hadn't looked up. The driver who honked earlier had already driven off. But in that quiet space between fog and sun, something had shifted. Something had arrived. And it didn't need to explain itself. The tall man didn't speak. He gave John a single nod, firm, deliberate, and stepped toward the pump without a word. His hand reached out, open, not rushed. John looked at him for just a breath longer than usual, then let go of the nozzle. No one argued. No one explained. The man took the hose gently, as if it were something sacred, and began to fill the tank. His movements were precise, practiced. Not rushed, not casual. Just respectful. John stood beside him, one hand resting lightly on the car, not out of weakness, but because it gave his body something to lean into while his mind adjusted to what was happening. Another of the men walked around to Eleanor's side of the car. He didn't knock on the window. He didn't stare. Just stood nearby, present, but quiet. She glanced at him once, then looked down at her hands, which had begun to tremble slightly without her noticing. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't a ceremony. This was instinct. John didn't ask for help. They didn't offer it like charity. It was something different, something understood only by those who'd worn the same silence, carried the same invisible weight. When the tank was full, the man replaced the cap, gave it a single twist, and stepped back. He didn't pat John on the shoulder. He didn't salute. But there was a pause, just long enough for a message to pass between them without being spoken. And then, slowly, he stepped away. Just as quietly as he had arrived. Inside the station, behind the glass, the young clerk stood frozen. One hand still held the receipt he hadn't handed to anyone. His other hovered near the register, like he wasn't sure what to do with it anymore. He'd seen everything. Not from up close, but from just close enough to understand. The black SUVs. The quiet men. The way they didn't speak, but said more than words ever could. Eleanor caught his eyes through the windshield. Not on purpose. Just a glance that lingered longer than either of them expected. He looked young. Too young to know what that kind of silence meant. But something inside him shifted, subtle, but visible. He blinked. Then looked down. Not out of shame. Not quite. More like someone realizing they'd missed something important, and it couldn't be undone. Eleanor didn't glare. She didn't offer a smile either. Just watched as he stepped back from the counter, lowered his head, and walked slowly toward the back room. No fanfare. No apology. Just quiet. She turned her attention back to John, who was adjusting the strap of his cane with calm precision. He hadn't noticed the boy. Or if he had, he chose not to. In that moment, nothing needed to be said. Some lessons arrive without sound. And some regrets stay longer when no one asks you to feel them. The pump clicked once, sharp, final. The man who'd filled the tank replaced the nozzle without a word. He gave John a single nod, then stepped back toward the SUV. The others followed in silence, their movements calm, unhurried. There was no need for a goodbye. The engine started again, low, steady, like a hum beneath the earth. And then, they were gone. John stood still for a moment, hand resting on the cap before tightening it. Not rushed. Just certain. He didn't look around. He didn't need to. The world had quieted itself. Eleanor stepped out of the car. Not because she had to. Just because something in her needed to feel the morning air. She walked to his side and brushed her hand gently against his back. Not a push, not support. Just a presence. He looked at her. No words. Only that familiar look, the one he used to give her on Sundays, when church let out and they were the last ones to leave. She smiled. Small. Real. They got back into the car together. The engine turned over. She glanced at the fuel gauge. Full. Her eyes lingered a second longer than necessary. As they pulled out of the station, Eleanor looked back once at the pump, the glass window, the boy who was no longer there. Then forward again. One hand on John's knee. The tank was full. And so was her heart. Sometimes, the loudest honor comes in silence. John never raised his voice. He didn't defend himself with words. But the way he stood, waited, and accepted help without asking, that was dignity. Eleanor didn't shield him or step in. She let him carry his weight, even when it hurt to watch. And the men who showed up didn't need to be introduced. They simply saw a brother enacted. That's what quiet courage looks like. It doesn't beg for attention. It shows up, stands firm, and leaves the world a little more human. Have you ever witnessed a moment like that, where respect didn't need a speech, just presence? If this story reminded you of someone you love, or a value you still believe in, help us share it. Click like, share with someone who understands, and subscribe to American Quiet Courage. Because not every hero wears a uniform. Some just hold the pump a little longer than others.